Hey, good day, everyone. I'm Marty, also known as Raging Owlbear on social media, and today we're going to talk about 4th edition a little bit. I started a conversation on the Twitter side of things because lately I've been kind of going back through some of my old RPG books and just kind of looking at just mechanics in general and how different games, not just D&D, but different games approach certain subjects. And in rereading parts of 4th edition, I was somewhat surprised, or just I hadn't remembered certain aspects of D&D 4th edition, that because I hadn't played in 10 years. And it reminded me that, 4th edition is sits in sort of a very funny place because there's a lot of folks who came from 2nd edition and 3rd edition, and when 4th edition came out, it was such a shift in the style of D&D that people either were cool with the changes and really liked it and enjoyed the game, or they thought it was too rapid of a change, too different from what they knew from before. So a lot of people really hated on it without probably giving it a proper chance, just because, people are resistant to change. People like what they like. And so when something that they love has been changed drastically, as we can see on the internet pretty much every day, people will take umbrage. And, the 4th edition did do a lot of things differently than some of the earlier editions. And it was not a perfect system. It did have its flaws, but, I think it took a lot more heat due to sort of the timing and the nature of the update and various other things that were sort of at work in the gaming industry at that time. So even though it was actually quite a good game, there were a lot of hardcore detractors that didn't like it. But at the same time, my thread that I started on Twitter shows that there was a lot of love for D&D, and actually a lot of people came into the game during the 4th edition era. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but really what I wanted to talk about tonight was not to sort of defend 4th edition and all, and its various complaints and stuff like that. But I really wanted to talk specifically about the role-playing aspects about it, because 4th edition got a very bad reputation about being very specifically about tactical combat and not about RP at all. That was one of the major complaints that you would see on the message boards. That it's a video gamified version of D&D. It's not real D&D. It doesn't have RP and stuff like that. And from what I've been reading, in my reviewing of the mechanics, it's just absolutely not the case. Now, again, 4th edition, it wasn't a perfect system, but I do believe it did take a lot of unfair, complaining about it, just because of the nature of the changes in the game. So let's talk a little bit about that. Well, first things first is, one of the things that 4th edition does is all the classes, they kind of really broke down the mechanics into a way to make all the classes be much more balanced in terms of the way that the power would creep up the scale as they leveled up. Because again, in earlier editions of D&D, the wizards and the spellcasters, warlocks, wizards, clerics, whatever, the spellcasters would start out a little weak, but then get very strong, and the marshals would start out very strong in early levels, but pretty much get very weak in comparison to their spellcasting, peers. And 4th edition was an attempt to fix some of that issue, and it actually did. It really did level the playing field for all classes. It made, and actually a lot of people who love 4th edition are the people who love playing martial classes, fighters, rangers, paladins, stuff like that. 4th edition was very kind to melee classes. And so a lot of times you'll find that the hardcore fans of 4th edition are people who enjoy playing those classes, because 4th edition really gave them lots of different cool maneuvers they could do. You have the warlord class, which is kind of a fighter, but also has some command abilities similar to maybe to like a cleric, but they're really more just like they're a commander, and so they give orders and they can manipulate the battle by those types of things. And then of course you have the standard fighters and paladins and whatnot. But what this meant was, because of the classes, well, fourth edition went to level 30, so that was probably one mistake that I think the designers made, is that they decided it was going to go all the way to level 30. Capping at level 20 probably would have been a better idea, because then they could have not necessarily used so much page count on combat capabilities. But so what ended up happening is you get these class pages where you just have pages upon pages. And not everything is a combat ability. There are what are called utility powers or utility abilities as well. But basically every class had to have 30 levels of these powers, and every level had multiple powers associated with them. So that means you're spending a lot of page count in these books. The great majority of this page count is based on combat capabilities. And so if you're an outsider sort of looking in or looking at these books for the first time, you might think, well, wow, that really is heavily slanted towards combat. Now, again, this is something that other versions of D&D also have complaints about. There's a lot of folks who play other games in the indie sphere who just say, D&D has like basically zero social mechanics, and they're not entirely wrong. I mean, the whole idea of D&D, especially in the early versions of the game, is that you didn't have social mechanics because the whole idea is that your social mechanics were a conversation between you and the DM. So you would talk in character about things that your character needed to NPCs or whatnot, and then the DM would have this give and take, and there were no skill rolls about it. It was all about just talking it out and trying to convince the DM of your point of view. Now, by the time 3rd edition came around, of course, they added skills. They added diplomacy. They added intimidation, because sometimes your character should be better at certain skills than you are. So if I'm a bard, but I'm not that glib, if I'm not good at improv, if I'm, I should be able to use some of my charisma abilities, in the game the way a fighter uses his strength or her strength. So the whole idea of adding skills into the game was to say, hey, when a fighter is doing their job, you don't physically make them lift things up, in your house. Say, okay, can your fighter lift that portcullis? Okay, go over there. I put 40 pounds on the floor. Go lift those 40 pounds over your head, or something like that. Whereas in old school D&D, if you were a charisma character, those things like negotiation and bluffing and those things, those weren't handled by skills and mechanics. You had to talk through that stuff. So, by the time 3rd edition rolled around, and then of course 4th edition and 5th edition followed suit, you had all these skills for social mechanics. Now, that's sort of where we roll into 4th edition, because again, 3rd edition you have the diplomacy, you have deception, you have other sort of social skills, but everything is kind of a pass-fail. All the skills in D&D were kind of like, you roll a d20, you roll high, that's great, you roll low, that's bad. And that was pretty much where skills began and end. And my argument is actually that 4th edition added more social skills than any other version of the D&D game. And it added that in the form of skill challenges. And skill challenges were a way to express a goal that your party needed to do, but it wasn't a single coin flip style roll. there was maybe a number of tasks that you had to perform in order to succeed at this particular larger task. And this was used for social situations. So I'll get to that in a minute. But let me just back up before I jump too deep into the weeds. Let me back up and talk about why this sort of came to mind. Is I was going through the 4th edition books, and I was looking at character creation and whatnot. And the way character creation was described in the books was what really made me, it just kind of sparked memories. I was like, oh my gosh, I'd completely forgotten how forward-facing some of the role-playing mechanics were. And let me show just a quick example of some of them. So this is the very beginning of the Player's Handbook 1. This is starting on page 14, where it talks about character creation. And in the Player's Handbook, just like almost all the versions of D&D, here's basically how you create your character. And so it talks about you select your race, you select a class, you do your ability scores, you choose skills, you pick feats and powers and whatnot, and at the end it talks about you do role-playing character details. But the interesting thing about this part is, even though it comes at the end of the list of the process of making a character, these details are presented to the new player right up front in chapter 2, in this chapter, in just a few pages. So in terms of the process, it kind of puts the character detail stuff at the end. But before you even get there, I'll show you. It talks about building your character concept even before you've kind of gone through the process of sort of picking the race, class, and feats and whatnot. So let's just start here also talking about races and classes. The other thing that it does in this setup for character creation is it talks about what these races and classes are about from a lore standpoint without talking about any of the mechanics. The first 10, 15 pages of the character creation section does not talk about mechanics at all, except for one small area where it talks about generating the ability scores. So it does set up, oh, hey, this is how you create, strength, intelligence, dexterity, et cetera, et cetera. But all the rest of it is very much about the lore of the game, about who the races are, what the classes are, what they do in terms of, let's jump right into it. So again, this is the part about selecting your character race. So it talks about the races here. But, again, it describes them in a lore specific way, and it doesn't necessarily talk specifically about, what does that mean for your ability scores or what type of classes are best for that particular type of character. It just talks about the race. The Dragonborn are draconic humanoids. They wander the world as mercenaries and adventurers. The dwarves are indomitable warriors and master artisans. They live in mountain citadels, but they also are found in towns and cities. The Eladrin are a graceful magical race that come from the Feywild. They mostly live in cities that border between sort of the normal prime material plane and the Feywild plane. The elves, which are, sort of like the Eladrin Light, where they live, they wander the lands, they, et cetera, et cetera. Then it talks about half elves, and again, go down to the next pages, halflings, tieflings, et cetera, humans. So it talks about all of the race options strictly from a lore standpoint. And then similarly, it gets into, scrolling too much. It gets into character classes. And then here again, it talks about the classes from what do you want to play in your game, not because of what bonuses they get or what skills they have or whatnot, but like what is the type of character you want. So, again, clerics, courageous and devout. They're holy warriors. If you want to blast foes, if you want to bolster your companions, if you want to heal them or lead them, be this, you want to play a cleric. If you're a fighter, you're an expert in armed combat. If you want to mix it up in close combat, if you want to protect your companions, if you want to beat down your enemies, be a fighter. The same thing. Paladin, a devout warrior. The ranger, expert trackers and scouts and stuff like that. So it talks about all the classes from the lore perspective. There's no mechanics that have been talked about yet. So it's asking the player to start gelling the idea of their character in their mind without having talked at all about the mechanics of classes. And then that gets, of course, then there's warlock, wizard, etc. But then it also talks about the role. Now, this is one of the other things that people often complain about with 4th edition is talking about roles. And I find this weird that people complain about this because even though roles haven't been named explicitly, they've always been in the game. The idea that you've always needed a fighter who could stand up front, be your frontline warrior, absorb the blows, be heavily armored, and be the protector of the party. That's been there since 1st edition, or even the original white box D&D. Similarly, the cleric, who is a second line fighter but also supports with healing and other magic. They're the sort of the defender class, or in this case they're calling them the leader class in 4th edition. Defender classes are fighters and paladins. And then the striker class, rangers and rogues in 4th edition. But again, this is nothing new. The whole idea of the thief from the original game is they snuck around the backs while the fighter was sort of managing the front lines. The thief would sneak and hide in shadows and then try to stab somebody in the back. They were a striker. They were literally trying to strike from the darkness and support combat in that way. And then the controller, which are wizards, the controller is, again, they're controlling the battlefield with their magical capabilities. They're throwing out fireballs to kill off many of the little minions, or they're, casting spells that befuddle the enemy, that cause confusion, that, put out a fog cloud, to put out, fire. But the whole idea is these roles have existed in the game from the very beginning, and 4th edition was just the first edition to just call them out specifically to say, hey, this is the type of role that you have during a combat encounter. And people got all upset about, that they're making an MMO, No, these concepts predate computer role-playing games. These concepts were started by Dungeons and Dragons. MMOs got these concepts from games like D&D. That you had the tank, you had the frontline fighter, you had the healer, the cleric, you had the striker. Again, people are like, oh, but D&D is adapting the MMO language. No, the MMOs adapted the D&D play style. So this sort of complaint about calling out the roles for what they are, and complaining that makes D&D video gaming is absolutely ridiculous to me. Video games are D&D, not D&D is video gamey. The video games inherited all of these things from Dungeons and Dragons and not the reverse. Sorry, a little bit of a tangent there. But again, this is... It explains to the new player who's going through this character creation part of, what is important for them to know about playing the character. And so, again, it talks more in detail about what a controller does, what a defender does, what a leader is and does. They motivate their companions. They cast spells to, buff their party members. Strikers rely on mobility and trickery. Again, this is the same stuff that we've seen. And then this part of the character generation section is pretty standard. We've seen it a million times in the other versions. It talks about what all the ability scores are and what skills they are appropriate for, and what types of things who needs to use strength. What people require strength as part of their character class. So again, strength is for melee and clerics, fighters, and paladins, etc. Constitution talks about endurance and talks about the skills and the saving throws, fortitude, dexterity. All this y'all are intimately familiar about if you're watching this video, I'm sure. And now here's the first time that we actually get into the mechanics of the game, generating the ability scores. So after they've talked about the races and the classes and the stuff, now they do talk about here's what the scores can be, and here's what their modifiers would be if you get your scores that high. Now, of course, when you're generating a character, you're only doing 14, 15. You might have some 16, 17, stuff like that. And of course, it talks about how you create those, whether you use a standard array, in which case 16 is the highest number that you can get, or you can do a point buy method. And then, again, here's some different standard arrays that, if the DM decides, you can various different ways of generating the scores. And then, of course, there's rolling. And then it talks about, then you go into, you pick your feats, you pick your powers, and your equipment. It has just a little paragraph here. It says, go ahead and read those chapters for more details. This is the part, though, that came in next that intrigued me, is this part that really goes right in chapter 2 about the role-playing in 4th edition, and how I think this part really emphasizes the importance of the role-playing in the role-playing game. So again, right here at the beginning of this section, this is page 18. So this is only 4 pages. It's just 4 pages into the character creation section that talks about the importance of role-playing and as part of 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons. So it says your character is more than a combination of race, class, and feats. He or she is also a protagonist in a living, evolving story. Like the hero of any fantasy novel or film, he or she has ambitions and fears, likes and dislikes, motivations and mannerisms, moments of glory and of failure. I mean, this part is great, but let me show you what's coming up, which I think is even better. So then it talks about the example sort of character. Jaden the Grim, his personality is brooding, fatalistic, but he's also honest, which suggests the type of approach that the player might take towards negotiating with non-player characters, or discussing issues with the other characters and when they're role-playing in game. And then it says a well-crafted character personality expands your experience of the game dramatically. So again, page 4 of the character creation is emphasizing why in D&D the role-playing part is critical to the overall arc of the game. That this game is not just about tactical play, which again, I know the page count in these types of books have a lot of combat focus because, again, 30 levels of each class has 30 levels. Each of those levels has multiple capabilities. So yeah, you're going to spend a lot of page count on combat stuff. But let's also get to this next page, next couple pages. So then it talks about alignment and how that affects the larger world. Pretty stuff that you're used to seeing before. Now, they did, in 4th edition, the alignment became a straight line instead of the 9-point star. It's basically good and evil with neutrality or unaligned in the middle. They went, which is very much like it was in sort of basic D&D, so they kind of revisited that idea. I actually kind of like that, to be honest. I'm not going to, talk a little more about that right now because it's not what this video is about, but this is very interesting. If you want to take a look at this book, this is an interesting read. And then it goes a little bit into the deities. This is sort of a weird place for it to talk about the deities, but since they're talking about alignment, I kind of understand they're trying to sort of set the tone of the genre of the universe, of how alignment and the sort of the machinations of the deities is important to the genre, the whole concept of the game itself. But we're gonna skip past that. I mean, I do like, I love the way they sort of picked out deities that were, some of the old school deities, plus some of the Forgotten Realms deities and Greyhawk deities, and then sort of pick the best of all of them to kind of create a unique pantheon for 4th edition. This is actually one of my favorite parts of 4E, is again the way they did the alignment, the way they did the gods. I was a big fan. But okay, here's the part that I really, really loved in the character creation section. So again, this is page 23. So if you're a new player to this and you're actually reading the book, this is 9 pages in, and this talks about the personality, and this is what I think is missing out of a lot of versions of D&D. So here, it goes into personality, why it's important. A typical D&D adventure offers many opportunities for your character's personality to shine. Those role-playing opportunities usually arise in 3 kinds of situations: social interactions, decision points, and dire straits. And then it talks a little bit about what those are. So social interactions, when you're communicating with an NPC, when you're trying to influence a person, stuff like that. But then it talks about, it prompts, this is the part that I thought was fantastic, is prompting the player to think about how their character behaves in these situations. So, as you can see, how do others perceive you in these social interactions? And then it gives you some choices that you can make. And now you don't have to make these choices. You could use your own, keywords or whatnot. But the point is what it's doing is it's prompting you. It's prompting you as the player to think about the character that has nothing to do with the numbers on your sheet. And this is right in the beginning of the character creation section. And then, how optimistic are you? How trusting are you? So this is sort of the social side of your personality. So it's saying, hey, think about this part of your personality, of your character. And now it goes into decision points. It says, okay, when the chips are down and you have to make a decision or you have to act quickly, whatever, it asks you, how are you going to behave in this manner? Do you try to sneak past, or do you run in with swords drawn and spells blazing? Do you save the captives first, or do you pursue the slavers? So again, it's prompting you to start thinking about how your character behaves in certain situations. And God, this whole section should be in every D&D book, like right at the beginning. Talking about the personality and asking these questions. Like, this is the best D&D content in most of the books, in terms of getting a player to think about their character beyond just what's written on the sheet. 5th edition doesn't really do this. I'm going to have to go back and read the Player's Handbook again to see if there's any place that this gets called out so significantly. But this is really great stuff. So again, how assertive are you when making the decision? Are you impatient? Are you commanding? Are you more, are you more of a follower, or are you more of a leader? How conscientious are you about following the rules? Is there... Does every end is a means to an end? It's like, are you scrupulous? Are you pragmatic? Are you honest? Do the ends justify the means? How empathetic are you? Are you kind? Are you protective? Or are you hard-hearted and oblivious? And then last, it talks about the dire straits. So again, decision points. This is like maybe when you're before you're in the heat of the battle or whatnot, and then just Dire Straits is okay. Now that you're actually in the heat, facing a villain, whatever, in the midst of a hazardous situation, what are you doing? How do you react? So how courageous are you? Are you brave? Are you cautious? Are you reckless? Are you Leroy Jenkins? How do you feel when faced by setbacks? If you suffer a defeat, think about how your character reacts. Are they the one that is trying to, if the party has suffered a defeat, that you're trying to give them the pep talk, or are you just mad and quiet and brimming with vengeance or whatever? And then how are your nerves? Are you calm? Are you skittish? Are you unshakable? I mean, this is gold. It's like the Seinfeld. It's gold, Jerry. It's gold. I love this part. This is the most fun sort of rediscovery of 4th edition that I've had in sort of going through some of the books. And then, it even talks about your mannerisms. And it does, in other parts of the book, it talks about first player role playing versus third player role playing. And I'll show you an example of that in a bit. But, it's saying you don't have to completely play act, but, maybe think about what mannerisms your character might have. Do they have a catchphrase? By Cord's right arm, or whatever. The dwarves are upon you as you rush into battle. It's just fun little things to get the player thinking about stuff that they can throw into the game to make it a little bit more entertaining for them, for the DM, for their fellow players, and just to make your character a little bit more memorable and less like just generic dwarf number 2 or whatever. So all these things, it's prompting all the stuff during the character creation steps are prompting the player to think about stuff that has nothing to do with how capable you are in combat, with the numbers on your sheet, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, it talks about appearance and then backgrounds. Why did you become an adventurer? What made you decide to go into the class that you did? What's the best thing that's ever happened to you? What's the worst thing that's ever happened to you? Do you stay in touch with your family? Like, little things like this are great little RP elements. And again, all of this is in chapter 2 of this book. It's not like buried deep after you've made all of your mechanical choices. It's right here up front until you do things. And then after this, it gets into, actually teaching the game. So that was the character creation section. And then after that, it talks about, what is it? What's an ability check? What's all this stuff? So what it has done, again, is it's set up all those things about role-playing before it even talks about the mechanics, before it gets into this stuff about skill checks and ability checks and gaining levels and the other sort of things related to your class. So, that was one of the things that really caught my attention in reviewing these the books again. And let me just jump to a couple other things before I wrap it up here. And it's going on a half an hour, and this is actually much longer than I thought it would go. But very quickly, let's talk about the backgrounds, because again, this is in the Player's Handbook 2, and just like in 5th edition, you can pick a background, and then that might give you a couple mechanical things, like a skill so your class gives you a couple skills, and then your background might give you a skill or two. It's very similar. The 5th edition inherited these things from 4th edition, but I think actually 4th edition does this part better. It's because it does, just like it was prompting about your personality type in chapter 2. When you do get to the backgrounds part, it talks about, and again, 5th edition, when it presents the backgrounds, it says, hey, you're this type of person, and therefore you get these types of skills, and here's another benefit that you get from picking a background. Now, some of them do ask questions, but for the most part, they don't. It doesn't prompt you the way fourth edition does. And let me get into that specifically. So the backgrounds are sort of divided up into different background types. Like you can pick a background related to the geography that you grew up in, to the society that you grew up in. Was there some thing about your birth, you're a blessed birth or a cursed birth, or et cetera, et cetera. So there's like a lot of rich RP elements right in here. But what it is when you pick one of these, when you're looking through these, it asks you the questions. Okay, you're urban. You were raised in a large city. What part of the city did you grow up in? Did you stick to that part of the city, or did you explore? Were you a happy child, or are you just happy to move on with your life and forget about your childhood? Do you still have ties to your old neighborhood? So, you lived in the mountains. You're raised in the cold, craggy peaks. How often did you visit the lowlands? What brought you out of the mountains to become an adventurer? If you lived in the forest, how did you get food? Why were you raised? Were you raised in a forest or a jungle? Did you survive by foraging? Were you a hunter-gatherer tribe? Again, what if you were cursed? What type of... Who cursed you? Why did they do it? Did you ever see that person? What are the signs of your curse? How do they manifest? How does a curse affect you? Or just if you do an occupational background, this is really what 5th edition stuck with, is this sort of occupation idea. You were an artisan. What did you make? Did you enjoy your work, or was it just a means to support yourself? What was your finest creation, and what happened to it? Where is it now? I mean, these prompting questions about your background, and just really as a player, get your creative juices going, thinking about who this person is. Not that they have a strength 16, not that they are a bard that can, sing at people and cause magic spells. It talks about the personality, the mannerisms, how you became who you became, what motivations drive you, what are your goals, all these things are just phenomenal. And I don't know why in 5th edition they didn't explore this more in the background section, because this stuff is great. There's just, there's geographical, occupational background stuff, or there's background stuff that's related to the race, the society you grew up in. So there's so much here to add to the RP elements of your character. And then last but not least, let's jump into skill challenges. This has gone a bit long, but I do want to talk about this. This is the one place that 4E very clearly has mechanics that other versions of the game do not have. And so if you know a little bit about skill challenges, like I mentioned earlier, you have to make a number of skill checks and succeed at them before you fail. So you have to hit a certain number of successes before you hit a certain number of failures. And what this is used for, again, is not just physical challenges, but social challenges. And the very first example that they have in the Dungeon Master's Guide is a negotiation. Now, the writing is a little bit cheesy in this sort of a negotiation example, but this is what they're talking about. So they talk about the setup. Here's the NPCs need to convince a noble that they're trustworthy and that if the noble helps them out, it will be good for everybody. And so it talks about what are the skills that they can use, whether they're bluff, diplomacy, or insight, and then, history, intimidate, whatnot. And then it goes into, on the next page, it goes to a role-playing example. This is the first skill challenge example. And again, the writing here is a little cheesy, but it goes to show that 4th edition very much has role-playing as one of its important pillars of, design. Yes, combat is definitely, thick in the book, but clearly RP and exploration play their part as well. And so, again, I'm going to try to talk to the thief. I'm going to use diplomacy, and then it has the example of the person using first-person role-playing. My good Duke, if you grant our petition for aid, it will not only help us complete our quest, but will also secure, basically your borders from the goblin hordes. And so he says, I'm going to make a diplomacy check. But, he role plays. And then the next character, who may not be as comfortable in first person role playing style, uses the third person role playing style. And I like this too, because it's showing the different players who might have different comfort levels in that first person role playing style, how they would play out this social challenge. And so the second player says, "Hey, I'm trained in history. What do I know about this battle that the Duke mentioned?" And and then they roll their history check, and the DM says, "Oh yeah, okay. So that the Duke fought in this battle, and that that gave him enough fame and power that he rose, in the nobility and whatnot." And so again, the players can use these opportunities to use other skill checks to get more information, to help convince the Duke and whatnot. So, and again, the example is kind of cheesy in terms of its writing, but my point is that this is a social challenge. No other version of D&D has a social combat challenge, and that's kind of what this is, social combat. You're using your social skills to achieve a goal, and in this case it's negotiation, but and the one of the very next examples is using speak with dead with a creature that is not willing to necessarily give up the information you want, so you have to somehow manipulate the creature into telling you what it knows. So that's sort of like another example of a social skill challenge. They have an interrogation example skill challenge, and then and it has some of the physical skill challenges as well, like an urban chase scenario, or trying to find your way in the wilderness, etc., etc. Discovering lore. So in these examples, it shows that the designers of 4th edition were very much thinking about role-playing. And so the idea that people say that 4E does not support role-playing as one of its primary game design goals, I think is just wrong. Yes, it has a heavy emphasis on tactical combat, but clearly this example shows that there's a lot more to it. So anyways, it's going on 40 minutes. I hope you have enjoyed me sort of rediscovering these fun facets of 4th edition. And maybe if you hadn't played 4th edition, or you had some curiosity about it, I hope this enlightens you a little bit about what some of the game is about. But I'm going to wrap it up here. I've gone on long enough. I may have another video or two just talking about some of the other gems of 4th edition, because one of the things that basically almost everybody says is that the 4E, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Dungeon Master's Guide 2 especially have just some amazing content about, not just about D&D 4th edition, but about how to run a tabletop role-playing game in general. How to be a good game master, how to work with your players, how to, it's the two books. Honestly, if you get the 4th edition Dungeon Masters 1, Dungeon Masters Guide 2, they will help you in any game. I mean, the content in there is generic enough that it really does apply to running any tabletop RPG. And it's really, really good writing. Some people might say it's a little dry. I don't know. I honestly find it to be really cool. It's really one of the few Dungeon Master's Guides that teaches a new Dungeon Master how to actually run the game. Like not in terms of not just in terms of monsters and encounters and campaigns, but just how to maintain a session with a table full of people who all come from different backgrounds, who all may have different goals out of playing the game, and just the advice is just fantastic. So anyway, enough about that. I'm Marty, the Raging Owlbear on social media. I'm mostly on Twitter, but I have been trying to post more on the other socials. And, I'm going to try to put more stuff on my blog as well, try to revive that a little bit. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the RP side of 4th edition. And, give me a like, give me a subscribe. I don't do a whole lot of YouTube videos, so every little thumbs up and every little subscriber helps me with the algorithm. Do the brother a favor and give me a like, even if you don't like me. Hell, give me a dislike. That helps you in the algorithm too. Do whatever. Add comments. Help a brother out, as they say. But anyways, thank you for listening. I hope it's been enjoyable, and I'm hoping to do some more 4th edition and, again, 5e, Shadow Dark content, old school content. I'm trying to do a little of everything these days. I just haven't really kept up with my channel and my blog recently, but I want to change that. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope to see you again real soon on the channel. All right. Have a good day.